This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories. From South Africa to Somalia, Uganda to Madagascar, people in East and Southern Africa are bracing themselves for more severe weather conditions. José Filomeno dos Santos, the son of Angola's former president, goes on trial for corruption and money laundering. Also in the program, a splash of Nigerian color in London. We meet the artist determined to use the colors of his African childhood to brighten up the British capital. Well, he's got his belts back, and now two-time world boxing heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua says he'd like to defend his titles in Nigeria someday. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. We start today with more warnings about bad weather for Eastern Africa. Rescue efforts continue in Uganda after floods killed 22 people and many more are feared missing. Now, in neighboring Rwanda, the Environment Ministry said 15 people had been killed by heavy rains across the country. Now, Somalia has also been affected as a major river burst its banks, displacing those who live nearby. We'll have more on that later, but first we go to Madagascar, where Cyclone Belna has hit the northwest of the country. Here's Staff Deneos from BBC Weather to tell us more.
Warnings are in force for northern and western Madagascar for the arrival of Cyclone Belna, which has been strengthening over the open waters of the Western Indian Ocean. Now, the system has continued to weaken as it's pushed ever closer to North Madagascar. It has brought some very heavy rain and strong winds to Mayotte Island, to the northwest of the island. Now, the system will impact the northwest coast with some fairly strong winds and heavy rain over the next few days, but it's going to be more of a rainmaker as it continues to push southwards across western Madagascar, bringing up to 150 to 200 millimetres of rain in the worst affected areas. Meanwhile, across the eastern African mainland, we're looking at further torrential downpours and thunderstorms over the next few days, which could lead to further flooding. There is also more heavy rain poised to push into Somalia as we reach the latter parts of the week. As we head on to the weekend, some of this rain could be extremely heavy and could lead to further flooding in the area.
And more flooding indeed in South Africa's Gauteng province. An elderly couple were rescued when they were trapped by rising floodwater as they tried to drive through the water. Authorities in the country have issued a flood warning in several parts of the country, and there's been big power cuts there too, which officials are blaming on heavy rain at coal power stations. Now, as we saw earlier, East Africa has been hit by severe flooding over the weekend. Rescue efforts are being ramped up in Uganda, where floods and landslides have killed dozens of people. Now, the death toll in Budibuyo has risen to more than 20 after a severe flood on the weekend. And in Somalia, heavy rain and floods have caused damage across the country. In the ancient port town of Eni, in the northeastern part of the country, one person has been killed as the authorities try to assess the damage caused by Tropical Storm Pawan, which brought wind and torrential rain to that region on Saturday. Well, joining me from Kampala is Irene Nakasita from the International Committee of the Red Cross. Thanks for taking time to talk to us on Focus on Africa. So we have an overview of the countries and how the floods have impacted them. What we don't know specifically is what your kind of support, what successes it's had.
Well, thank you so much for having me. In terms of the response that the Red Cross is providing, we have first of all supported the search and rescue to be able to recover all the bodies of the people who died in Budibuyo in Western Uganda. And then we've also provided dead body bags so that they are treated with dignity, including blankets and transportation of the bodies and handed over to the hospitals and then the different family members for burial. We've also supported in terms of giving psychosocial support to the bereaved families and everybody that was affected in the disaster. Our teams are on ground, moving in communities. Actually, 12 sub-counties were affected. So we have deployed people in all the 12 sub-counties to continue with search and rescue, as well as setting up a table for tracing services. In case anybody is missing a family member, they're approaching us to be able to search for their missing persons.
All right, let's
now,
move
we
away.
have also dispatched...
Sorry to interrupt you, but let's move away from Uganda. It appears you've done quite a bit there. We move away to other parts of the continent, like Somalia, for instance. South Africa is now bracing itself also. Rwanda also was hit. And there is also Madagascar that's, expecting a cyclone there as we speak. What would you say you have done, put in place to take care of things?
Actually, from Uganda, we are following these details from afar, but in liaison and coordination with the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Movement. They are liaising with Madagascar and the other national societies in the different countries to be able to support the people affected. They are also issuing early warning messages, especially in Madagascar, so that people can take heed and also prepare for the disaster yet to happen. So apparently in the communities, there are volunteers deployed to be able to support people and also prepare them psychologically for this.
What are the main challenges you're facing in terms of funding, support? What are you facing?
Well, in terms of resources, the Red Cross globally, we're actually constrained because we keep relying on support from the different partners whom we work with. But we also have pre-positioned stock. Just in case it gets done, we can always rely on support from other partners to be able to handle situations.
Now, people will be asking what is the biggest tip or the tips you'd give anyone caught up in this kind of situation. What should they remember to do?
Well, take heed and also respond to the messages that are being issued, early warning messages that are being passed on in your respective communities. Some people are usually reluctant until the actual incident happens, but our call to them is they should respond before the disaster actually hits. That's what we can give as a caution.
All right, Irene Nakasita, thanks for taking time to talk to us and Focus on Africa. Thank you. Well, let's now take a quick look at other stories making the headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. The death toll from the residential building that collapsed in Kenya has risen to 10 after 3 more bodies were found in the ruins. More than 30 people have been rescued from the rubble in the Nairobi suburb of Tasia, but there are fears more are still trapped. Search and rescue operations have continued since the 6-story residential building collapsed on Friday. And the governor of the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, has pleaded not guilty to more than 30 counts of corruption, including money laundering and receiving bribes. Mike Sonko, who models himself on American rappers, is accused of making more than $3 million through unlawful activities. 26-year-old Zozibini Tunzi has won the Miss Universe contest in Atlanta. She beat more than 90 contestants from around the globe in the 68th installment of Miss Universe. Tunzi earned 3 cheers during her closing speech, in which she talked about wanting to empower women.
So I want to challenge men to actually step up, to teach their sons how to look at little girls and young girls as their equals from a very young age, so that by the time they grow up to be the men that we need in society today.
Now, the son of Angola's former president has gone on trial for corruption. José Filomeno dos Santos is accused of involvement in a billion-dollar corruption scandal. The case is being seen as a test of the country's commitment to undoing the corruption that flourished during the rule of President Eduardo dos Santos. Well, I'm joined in studio now by the BBC's Mary Harper. Thanks for taking time to talk to us, Mary. What's he being specifically accused of?
The former president's son, popularly known as Zenu in Angola, has been accused of stealing more than $500 million from Angola when he was in charge of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. He has denied these accusations, but as we say, he's currently on trial for corruption.
And it's quite significant. There's an extraordinary, really, because this family, the former first family, was quite powerful in Angola.
Absolutely, and I must say that it really has astonished people, because in a way people felt that that family, the Dos Santos family, was untouchable. Even after the president stepped down a couple of years ago, they thought that these people would be able to continue in very, very powerful positions. For example, another daughter of the former president, Isabel Dos Santos, who is known as the richest woman in Africa. She was in charge of the state oil company. She has been removed from that position, and now we have the former president's son, not only removed from a very powerful position, but actually on trial for corruption, something that I think Angolans thought would never happen.
Never happen indeed. I just wonder where the turnabout came. Because most people thought this would never really happen. He came from the same political party as the current president. And people are asking, is this they want to be seen to be doing something, or is it genuine change and fight against corruption?
Yeah, people were very surprised because when the new president, João Lourenço, came to power, everyone thought he was the person who was chosen by the former president Dos Santos, that Dos Santos would carry on really sort of manipulating the situation from behind the scenes. But actually, this president has astonished everybody by turning on the former family, who were great allies of him in the past, and I think they thought that he would protect them, but in fact he has turned on them and not only removed them from powerful positions, but now, as we see, some of them, at least this particular young man, is now on trial for corruption.
And he's not appearing in court alone, is he?
No, he's not. He's not the only one charged. There's also a former governor of the central bank who's accused of assisting him in spiriting away these hundreds of millions of dollars from a country that is greatly impoverished, even though it has so many natural resources, including oil and diamonds.
He'd been arrested earlier and then released.
Exactly.
Under what circumstances?
Yes, he was put in jail in a hospital prison for a few months, and then he was released. But he did know that he would then have to face trial.
All right, Mary Harper, thank you. Thank you. This is a Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come, Russia is banned from international sporting events, including the next summer and winter Olympics and the 2022 Football World Cup, for tampering with data on doping. That's in sports. I'm Sophie Ikenye, and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The top stories on this program. From Somalia to South Africa, Uganda to Madagascar, people in East and Southern Africa are bracing themselves for more severe weather conditions. And José Filomeno dos Santos, the son of Angola's former president, goes on trial for corruption and money laundering. Now, planting trees has long been seen as one way of trying to combat climate change and help remove carbon from the atmosphere. Maintaining or even renewing forests also helps lessen the effects of droughts and flash floods. Now, in northern Ethiopia's Tigray province, 1.5 million hectares of woodland has been restored. Justin Rolat went to meet one of the women who's been vital to the project's success.
There is a stark beauty here. 100 years ago, trees covered a third of Ethiopia. Now it's less than 5%. And without trees, there is nothing to protect the soil from drought, wind and bursts of rain, which all become more intense with climate change. When the soil goes, very little grows. But people are breaking this vicious circle.
This one is the African olive.
An African olive, does it bear fruit? Does it grow olives?
Yes, it does grow olives. They're much smaller than the...
Sarah Tewolde Burhan is an expert at restoring degraded land. This is her tree nursery at Mekelle University in northern Ethiopia.
Some 30, 40 years ago, data shows that droughts were recurring every 10 years. Now they're every 5 years. So we need to prepare as a community, as a society, to be able to function even in drought years. And one of the best ways to do that is to restore environments. And in restored environments, we can capture every little drop of rain that comes.
What Sarah and the communities she works with have achieved is really impressive, and you can see it very vividly on this experimental site on the outskirts of Mekelle. Look over here. So this is degraded land. It's been used as farmland fairly recently, virtually no vegetation. But take a look on the other side of the fence, and already after just a few years it's begun to regrow. You can see shrubs, you can see trees, it's greener and it's way, way lusher.
Down this flat area.
Give it a couple of decades and the results are even more impressive. Here's how it works. People and animals are kept out to allow natural regrowth. The trees help keep moisture in the soil, recharging rivers and springs.
It may seem very trivial to people who live in wet environments that spring has come back. But for people who live in a dry environment, a spring that was around like 100 years ago or 200 years ago is now coming back and giving water is highly significant.
And this regreening is happening on a vast scale. In this one province in northern Ethiopia, they've reforested 15,000 square kilometres.
There are more rains because we are protecting more land. There's more moisture in the soil because we're protecting the land. They do know it, they do notice, they do see it.
Worldwide, we are still losing an area of forest the size of the UK every single year. But the regreening effort here in Ethiopia is a lesson in what can be done. Evidence that when people work together, we can build resilience to our changing climate. Justin Rolat, BBC News, Northern Ethiopia.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. Let's find out what's happening in the world of sport. Peter.
Many thanks, Sophie. And let's start with boxing. Anthony Joshua has got his belt back now, and he says he would like to defend his world heavyweight titles in Nigeria in the near future. It follows after his rematch win over Andy Ruiz Jr. on Saturday night. Joshua, who is of Nigerian heritage, was congratulated on his points decision success in Saudi Arabia by Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari, who tweeted, "You have brought joy and celebration to millions of Nigerians at home and in the diaspora, and we are and will continue to be immensely proud of you." Now, Joshua is expected to defend his titles against a mandatory challenger in a few months, but he told reporters that Africa is rooting for him, so he would definitely love to fight out there. Now, the Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev has described a 4-year ban on taking part in major international sporting events as chronic anti-Russian hysteria. The ban was imposed after the World Anti-Doping Agency found Russian officials had tampered with laboratory data to cover up evidence of state-sponsored doping.
From Olympic hosts to sporting outcasts, ever since holding the Winter Games in 2014, Russia has been mired in an unprecedented doping scandal, and now it faces an unprecedented punishment. After fresh revelations of another cover-up by Russian officials, this morning the World Anti-Doping Agency banned Russia from all major sporting events for 4 years. Following a string of transgressions, their patience had run out.
Russia was afforded every opportunity to get its house in order and to rejoin the global anti-doping community for the good of its athletes and for the integrity of sport, but it chose instead a different route.
They've had 3 swings at the bat, struck out 3 times. The duplicity, deceit, and deception that they exhibited is just beyond the pale. And I think it's an embarrassment to the athletes in the world.
It's recently emerged Russia's anti-doping agency tampered with laboratory data, altering or deleting athletes' test results. Earlier, the new head of the Russian agency told the BBC the scale of the previous regime's cover-up.
Thousands of entries were deleted.
Yeah.
Thousands.
Thousands.
The punishment means there'll be no Russia team at next year's Olympics. Only athletes who can prove they're clean can compete under a neutral flag, as some did at last year's Winter Games in Pyeongchang. It also means Russia are banned from the Football World Cup. Remember, they hosted the last tournament, but their national team won't be at the next one in 2022. Russia can appeal against today's punishment, but 5 years on from the now notorious Sochi Games, one of sport's traditional superpowers is out in the cold. Andy Swiss, BBC News.
And there's one Premier League match tonight. Arsenal will look for their first win under caretaker boss Freddie Ljungberg when they play at West Ham. The Gunners' African duo of Pepe and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang will be hoping to help the team get back to winning ways. Arsenal are on a 9-match winless streak and are now 10 points adrift of the top 4 and just 5 points clear of the relegation zone. And even the manager of tonight's opponents says it is strange to see Arsenal where they are.
It's strange to be Arsenal in this situation. We know that it's a big team that all the last 20 years was normally played by Champions Leagues, but football is like that. From one day to another, the result change.
Sophie, that's your sport.
So did you watch the Anthony Joshua bout?
Do you know what? I'm ashamed to say I didn't. But if he goes out to fight in Nigeria, I'll be the first on that plane.
Who do you think would take him on there in Nigeria? Do you have any strong boxers, you think?
Well, I don't think he wants to fight a Nigerian. He'll have to fight a contender, you know, and, you know, so whoever it is. I don't think it's going to happen next year. It's probably happen in 2021 because he has some mandatory fighters he needs to fight next year in 2020. And then maybe 2021 we can have a big one in Nigeria, but I'll be the first on that plane. I'll even take his boxing gloves for him.
All right, Peter, thank you. Now, they say London is quite drab and grey, but it won't be for long if the British-Nigerian artist Yinka Ilori has any say in the matter. Now, this London-based artist-designer uses colours inspired by his Nigerian heritage and stories inspired by his upbringing to create his work. Now, his Technicolor work can be seen in the galleries and on the streets and architecture of London.
A lot of Nigerian parents still want you to be an engineer or a doctor or a scientist or something more conventional. I don't know, it took time for me to kind of convince my parents, but now they're like extremely proud and they're telling all their friends that my son is an artist designer and he's done this and this and this and everything. My name is Yinka Ilori. I'm an artist based in London, and what I do is tell stories through objects and stories in public spaces. My work is very much inspired by my Nigerian British culture and heritage, and what I try and do is retell my narratives through colour based on my memory. So this is the Colour Palace in Dulwich Picture Gallery. The main narrative of the pavilion was very much inspired by my visits to Lagos, Nigeria. In particular, this market called Balongo Market, which is a fabric market full of culture and love. Being in that amazing, immersive, environment and space, I wanted to bring that culture and that energetic, explosion of colour into Dulwich. My work is very much about memory. We always had parties and we went to church and we went to weddings. And in those special occasions, people always wore colour everywhere. It's a colour explosion. People are always happy when they wear colour. But also, there's always that kind of yearning for, for home. You miss the aspect of your village or your town or your mum or your dad or your family. So what I try and do is I try to remember those kind of special key moments and I remember what colours they wore. And then I try to bring those colours into my work. I think for me, your culture is what will set you apart from everyone else. That will always be your power.
That's great, isn't it? Let's now bring you up to speed with our top story here on Focus on Africa. There have been more warnings about bad weather for Eastern Africa. Rescue efforts continue in Uganda after floods killed 22 people and many more are feared missing. Now, in neighboring Rwanda, the Environment Ministry said 15 people had been killed by heavy rains across the country. Somalia has also been affected as a major river burst its banks, displacing those who live nearby. And in Somalia, heavy rains and floods have caused damage across the country. Now, over in South Africa's Gauteng province, an elderly couple were rescued when they were trapped by rising floodwater as they tried to drive through the water. Authorities in the country have issued a flood warning in several parts of the country. And there's been big power cuts there too, which officials are blaming on heavy rain at coal power stations. Don't forget you can catch up with all the latest news and current affairs on our website. That's bbc.com/Africa. That's Focus on Africa for now. Thanks for your company.